Hello, this is Michael Brown, and I am a partner in Burlington Associates in Community Development. We work with startup and existing community land trusts and their public sector and private sector partners across the country. If you're interested in learning more about us and what we do, please check out our website, which is www.burlingtonassociates.com. What I'm going to do now is provide an overview of community land trusts, what they are, how they're structured, what they do, what they require, and what reasonably can be anticipated as outcomes from the successful operation of community land trust activities. If we're going to take a look at community land trusts as a potential solution, we need to at least acknowledge the nature of the problem. And that is, as we all know, is that housing is already expensive, and over time it gets more and more expensive in almost every housing market that's out there. And the nature of these affordability gaps creates both a horizontal and a vertical challenge. The vertical challenge is that these numbers get bigger over time. The gaps between what people can reasonably afford based upon their income and what the cost of housing is, these gaps get bigger over time, which requires more and more resources. And at the same time, speaking horizontally, more and more people fall into the need for affordably priced housing, needing assistance to be able to purchase and own or rent a home of their own. So the challenge we face is, how do we make housing affordable, and should we keep it affordable from one occupant to another over time? How do we prevent households from being displaced from the neighborhoods and communities that they call home because of the cost of housing? And how do, at the time that these needs are spiraling and resources are dwindling, how do we protect and leverage the investment of public sector and private sector subsidy resources that are needed to make this housing affordable in the first place? What we typically see in a lot of our affordable homeownership programs out there is that if we're going to bridge the gap between what a household can afford based upon their income and what the cost of that housing might be, we tend to target the assistance to that individual household, structuring that assistance either as an outright gift of money to that homebuyer household or as a deferred loan that's forgiven slowly over time, which is also a grant that just takes longer for the homeowner to realize, or it's structured as a loan that's paid back out of the sale proceeds of the home. But even in those situations, when the home sells for a market rate, the resource of the loan is paid back to whoever provided it, but because the gaps have gotten bigger over time, it's not enough to make a home affordable a second time. So community land trusts are forcing us to think about how do we apply these resources and how do we do that most effectively. And typically a lot of the affordable homeownership assistance programs that are out there do not come with any or very limited protections on the affordability of that home from one transaction to the other. And almost always they do not include any ongoing support and assistance to the households who receive this help to purchase and own this home after they move in. So community land trusts do a number of things particularly well. Preserving housing affordability, protecting and leveraging the investment of the resources that create the availability and the affordability of the home, helping homeowners become and remain successful over time, and in so doing help to stabilize the neighborhoods and communities in which these homes and homeowners are located. And the community land trusts do that by doing some things very differently. So community land trusts take a very different approach to how the ownership of property is structured, when and how the resources that are invested to make the home initially affordable, when and how those resources are applied, and how the nature of the relationship between the households that are receiving this assistance and the organization that's made this possible, how the nature of those relationships are nurtured and maintained over time. Most of the community land trusts that are operating across the country are community-based nonprofit organizations with a mission that qualifies them for designation as a charitable organization under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. Not all community land trusts are separate organizations. Some community land trusts are structured as separate corporations that are wholly owned by a parent organization as a subsidiary entity. In others, community land trusts are operated as a program under the corporate structure and governance of an existing organization. One of the hallmarks, however, that we've seen in community land trusts is that, and pretty typically found as a best practice in community land trusts, is that the governance structure, the board of directors, is comprised of three equal categories of directors. A third of the seats are set aside, reserved for the folks who live in housing that's made and kept affordable by the community land trust. A third of the seats are designated for people who live within the community land trust geographic service area, and while they are not the direct beneficiaries, they are the uh, they're the neighbors of community land trust, and we want their input and we want their engagement in the process. And the remaining third of those are generally designated for persons with particular skill sets and individuals that can help enhance the likelihood that the community land trust will be successful over time. So the point here is to take these three different perspectives within the community and place them in equal balance on the governing board of the community land trust. Perhaps the single most defining characteristic of community land trust is separating the ownership of the land from the ownership of the building that's located on it. So at a home purchase closing, by an income qualified buyer using resources that have been cobbled together to create that affordability. The home buyer purchases the home at a price they can afford. The CLT in turn that leases that land parcel as defined by the legal description to that home buyer by means of a long-term lease that's typically 75 to 99 years, most often 99 years, that's inheritable and renewable for a second 99-year term that provides that homeowner household with an exclusive right to use and occupy the property. And in so doing, gives the CLT, the reason that community land trusts do this, gives the community land trust on behalf of the community it serves the ability to control the transfer of ownership of that property should that home buyer household ever choose to move on. So in a classic community land trust situation, again, the community land trust retains the ownership of the land, leases it to the home buyer household who is able to purchase this home with a mortgage that they can afford and subsidy assistance that the community land trust has been able to put together. But the important thing here is we're not providing the subsidy as assistance targeted to an individual household. The subsidy resources are used to write down the purchase price of the home that's affordable to the target clientele. This ground lease agreement that's executed at closing between the homeowner, home buyer, homeowner, and the community land trust serves a twofold function. One is as a legal instrument that conveys to that homeowner an exclusive, durable right to use and occupy that property for the term of the lease, subject, of course, to their willingness to abide by the terms of that lease agreement. And then secondly, the community land trust ground lease defines the expectations the community has regarding the homeowner's use and occupancy of the property, as well as what happens in the event of a transfer of ownership. So basically what's being the arrangement that's being offered is in consideration for receiving assistance to purchase and own a home buyer household and limited income household would otherwise not be able to afford. The community lays out common sense, community appropriate expectations regarding the property and the homeowner's use and occupancy of that. So there are restrictions then that are stipulated in this ground lease. All of these are community appropriate. They're not intended to be onerous or complicated. It's just simply making sure that community appropriate standards are followed. So every community land trust designs their ground lease differently, sets the terms and conditions based upon the needs they are addressing and the goals of the organization and the community that they're a part of. But the kinds of restrictions and stipulations that we see in community land trust ground leases include these, right? So this is an owner-occupied home, so the expectation is it needs to be the homeowner who's received this assistance. It needs to be their primary resident. It's not a rental property. It's not an income-producing property. So the expectation is the homeowner lives in their home as their primary residence. They may not sublet. They pay the taxes. They pay the insurance. They take care of their home. They do the same kind of things that any other homeowner does. That they use their home in a manner that's consistent with zoning, that they take care of it, and they and their household and any visitors and guests must use it responsibly, just like their next door neighbor, just like anybody else within the community. And because permanent affordability is often the motivating goal of the community land trust, again, the subsidy is used to write down the purchase price to an affordable level, and then the community land trust seeks to be sure to protect that affordability each time a community land trust is resold, at the same time allowing the homeowner to keep their equity. So by signing the community land trust ground lease, homeowners agree to leave the affordability that was created for them, should they ever choose to sell, to leave that affordability with the home so that the home remains affordable for another household that's in the same circumstances that they were in when they moved in. And the mechanism for doing that is a resale formula that's used to determine the price. And in so doing, what the community land trust tries to balance are two directly competing and equally important goals. On the one hand, wanting to provide a fair and equitable return to the seller, because equity is one of the rights of homeownership, as we know, but also making sure that at the same time we're protecting a fair and affordable price for the next limited income homebuyer household. And at the same time, then, by doing that, the community land trust makes sure that the investment of the resources that made the home initially affordable can help multiple households over time without having to go back and get additional resources. So there are a number of ways in which community land trusts structure their resale formulas. All of them assume that the homeowner should be entitled at resale to keep their equity. Like any other homeowner, they make a cash, upfront, out-of-pocket down payment, so they're paying for, if you will, a portion of they're buying, if you will, a portion of the value of the equity in the home. And like any other homeowner, as they make their monthly payments, they're slowly but steadily paying down the principal balance on their mortgage. So whatever equity they accrue during the time that they live in the home, they get to keep that. Plus, they get to keep some percentage, some share, some amount of the appreciation in the home. But there's a limit on that appreciation, because if the community land trust allowed that home to sell for whatever the market will bear, two things happen. One is the home sells at an unaffordable market-driven price, and the second, the subsidy resources disappear in their pocket. So again, we're trying to navigate that delicate balance between a fair return to the seller and a fair and affordable price to the incoming buyer. One of the approaches that's used, there's a couple of major ones, but one of them is an index formula where the homeowner gets to sell the home for the original purchase price they paid, plus a percentage for each year that they live in their home. And that percentage is either a fixed rate, 1.5%, 2%, 1.25%, whatever the community determines is appropriate, or the index is pegged to a nationally adjusted, annually adjusted index, like the change in AMI or the area median income, or change in the consumer price index, or change in the blue collar wage base for the community in which the community land trust is operating. So taking a look at a purely hypothetical example, if the community land trust is able, whether it's new construction or acquisition rehab, to come up with a home that would otherwise sell in the open market for $300,000 and is able to secure $80,000 worth of subsidy, the community land trust can sell this home on leased land for $220,000. Again, the $80,000 is locked into the home and is used to reduce the purchase price, as opposed to structuring it as assistance to an individual buyer. The impact of the household is the same. They get $80,000 worth of equity benefit and are able to pay then, in this hypothetical example, a $220,000 purchase price that they could afford based upon their income. And again, these numbers are not intended to be representative of your community. I'm simply using them for simple arithmetic. So, in this case, the community land trust determines that the homeowner gets 2% simple interest on top of their original purchase price for every year that they live in the home. So playing out a hypothetical example, there's a resale in 10 years. The market value could have gone up to $350 or $450 or $510. It doesn't matter. It matters, but the resale price is not based upon market conditions. The community land trust instead says the homeowner gets to sell their home for 20% on top of what they originally paid. That 20% is 2% per year for each of the 10 years, multiplied by the original $220,000 is $44,000. So at resale, what the sale proceeds for the homeowner before they pay back the balance of their mortgage is $264,000. Then with that $264,000 at the closing, the homebuyer pays back whatever is the remaining balance on their mortgage. So in this case, after making 10 years of payments, they're going to walk away from this closing, in this hypothetical example, with more than $44,000 worth of sale proceeds, equity. in turn, the community land trusts that can sell this home, that in my hypothetical example has a market value now of $450,000, can sell it to the next person on their waiting list for $264,000. The original $220,000 purchase price plus the $44,000 that was determined by the resale formula. That combined $264,000 means a CLT can sell this home. It's got a market value in this example of $450,000 without having to go back to the city or the county or the foundations or the employers or private donors or whatever the combination of resources they're able to connect with. The CLT can sell this home at an affordable price without requiring any additional investment of resources. And that's the trade-off, right? So the magic and the challenge of these resale formulas is, are we providing the homeowner with enough equity when they sell, and are we keeping the price affordable to the next buyer so that we don't need the additional resources to enhance the affordability? That's that competing set of challenges that the community land trust faces. And all of this is then situated within an organization that's committed to long-term stewardship. One of without question, the single biggest contribution that community land trusts make is that they don't assume that once the home is created and made affordable and a home buyer household moves in, that their work is done. So the community land trust carries on a number of ongoing interactions, communication, and mutual responsibilities with the homeowner, including, because the ground lease stipulates specific requirements, you have to pay your taxes, you have to keep the home insured, you need to live it as your primary residence, those sort of common sense community appropriate, the community land trust takes community appropriate requirements, the community land trust takes on the responsibility for monitoring homeowner compliance with those and enforcing those in the event that we find that homeowners are having some difficulty or challenges with those, which transitions for the CLT into entering into these interactive, staying in touch, mutually accountable relationship with their homeowners, providing or arranging ongoing support for those homeowners on an as-needed basis to help enhance the likelihood they're going to be successful over time. It's not about running their lives. It's not about telling them what to do. It's about laying out clear expectations. It's about monitoring those expectations to make sure that this is working the way it's intended to be, providing, arranging, standing behind, backstopping these households to help enhance the likelihood of their ongoing success. So community land trusts are doing all kinds of development, all types and tenure of housing. It's a random sample of community land trusts. They're new construction and acquisition rehab. They are scattered site infill. They are congregate site development. They are detached single-family homes, attached single-family homes, townhomes, row houses, condominiums, housing cooperatives. Kind of anything that can be done relative to housing can be done and is being done on community land trust land. There are an increasing number of community land trusts that have begun to, in addition to their affordable home ownership, their affordable housing work, have begun to branch into multifamily housing, rental, low-income housing tax credit development, as well as mixed use and mixed income development. So at the top right-hand corner, that's a picture of Champlain Housing Trust property in downtown Burlington, Vermont. It is street level retail condo spaces and condo spaces above. The top left is artist live work space, just to give you an idea of some of the range of experimentation and portfolio expansion that we see community land trusts do around the country. Finally, this is in 24-1 is a community land trust near St. Louis, Missouri. They have a movie theater on community land trust owned land in addition to the housing that they're doing. It's the same mechanism where the community land trust retains the ownership of the land. There's a separate entity, an individual, a corporation, a limited liability corporation or partnership owns the improvements. The CLT leases the land to the owner of the improvements in order to protect the community's long-term interests. So taking a quick look before I wrap up at some of the tangible outcomes that we see with community land trust homeownership properties across the country. On average, we find that that community land trust homeowners are in their homes. Over 90% of CLT homeowners remain in their homes for at least the first 5 years. Interestingly enough, these are 30-year fixed rate mortgages with 99-year or sometimes 75-year, but most commonly 99-year inheritable, renewable ground lease agreements. And interestingly enough, the average length of homeownership across all the nearly 300 community land trusts operating across the country over the past several decades is the average length of homeownership is 7 years, which is what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac tell us is consistent with what's happening in the conventional market, which we would argue demonstrates that the community land trust arrangement works, that people are able to live in housing and are able to make transitions. Specifically, there have been a number of community land trusts that have, quite a number actually, of community land trusts been around long enough that they built portfolios large enough that they have gone through multiple resales. And we have found in those situations that those resales are a sample large enough to go in and do an evaluative study about whether the community land trust in fact delivers on its promises, protecting affordability, preventing displacement, protecting and leveraging the investment of resources that are used to create the affordability, a range of those sort of evaluative questions. When we did those evaluations, those studies, one of the outcomes that was most interesting to me, at least the questions that I was curious about, is what happens when a community land trust homeowner sells her home. Where does she go? What's her next housing situation? And what we found in these studies, which are commonly available on our website and other places, that in these places where we did the studies, that approximately 70% of community land trust homeowners, when they sell their CLT home, are able to leverage the security and stability of owning a home they would otherwise have not been able to afford, and this limited appreciation, this limited equity return, and they're able to go into the conventional market and buy a home of their own choice. And then because the community land trust has kept the home affordable, it can start that process all over again with the next limited income household. So what we might be able to do if we're doing this well is help people transition through the housing tenure ladder. One final measurable outcome is that we have found that community land trust mortgages perform at an excellent level. The picture that I'm going to paint here is when things 10 years ago, when things were at their very worst in the Great Recession. I share them with you because this is when things were at their very bleakest. What we find is that the same ratios that I'm about to share with you remain true today. So this is in the worst case scenario, but even today, we find that community land trusts perform exceptionally well. So in 2008-9, this is what, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association, was the level of serious delinquencies, and the red bars were what we saw in the community land trust world. Similarly, under foreclosure proceedings during that period of time, things were pretty difficult. According to the MBA, 4.63% of all mortgages nationwide were in foreclosure, and during that same period of time, the community land trust foreclosure rate was literally 1/10 of that, less than 1/2 of 1%. And again, that ratio, that performance level, less than 1/2 of 1% of community land trust mortgages in foreclosure remains true to this day. So what we see with community land trusts is homes remain affordable over time without requiring the investment of resources at a time that more and more people need the assistance. There's fewer of those resources, because the community land trust is able to protect and leverage those resources totally over time. So the kinds of outcomes that are possible, it's not a guarantee that this will happen in your community, but these are pretty consistently seen throughout community land trusts across the country, that we can create a situation that's beneficial to the households that are accessing this housing and living in this housing. We are creating a situation where we're using taxpayer and philanthropic resources very carefully, stewarding them very carefully, and creating a situation that's ultimately beneficial not only to individual households, but to neighborhoods and communities across the country. So I welcome you to take a closer look at community land trusts. If you're interested in learning more about them or interested in discussing those, please do not hesitate to contact me or Burlington Associates. You can reach us through our website. Thank you for your consideration. We look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Take care.